This is Roll Call for this edition of African Drums. The African drums are sounding.
Good evening. Welcome to African Drums, the television organ of the Cuffy 250 Committee, an organization dedicated to the empowerment of the African Guyanese community through education and the encouragement of self-activity. I am Elsie and I will be your host for this evening's program. Almost 2 weeks after the election that eventually brought a change in government, supporters of the new government are still in celebratory mode. But as the new government prepares to start governing, reality will soon set in. The promises made by the coalition during the campaign will have to be matched by policies and bold action. This is where the expectations of the people come in. Can the new government meet the heightened expectations of its supporters? This and other questions I will put to our panel today. The members of our panel are Dr. David Hinds, Mr. Phillip Williams, and Mr. Vincent Alexander, who are all members of the Cuffy 250 Committee. Gentlemen, welcome to African Drums.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the first question I want to ask is, what does this change in government mean for the ordinary working poor in Guyana? Dr. Hinds, do you want to start?
Well, I was hoping that Mr. Alexander would he takes the new ball better than I do. Mr. Alexander?
Okay, sure. So you're in the hot seat.
Well, I think that the question is an important question because it covers the entire spectrum, the working poor. The working poor is a reference to all Guyanese. I don't think that the same applies to all of the working poor, given the nature of society, the plural nature of society. I would say in the first instance that for the African Guyanese, and by extension for the African working poor, this moment is first a psychological moment. It's a moment of liberation, a moment when you can see the veil of alienation coming down, a moment that provides for connectivity, a moment when they can feel they can now express themselves, express their aspirations, and live for their hopes. But as you asked, it's about all poor. I think that the new government in its manifesto has emphasized the question of the alleviation of poverty, and therefore all of the poor could look towards some program of alleviation of poverty. It emphasized the question of education as a means for self-realization and as a means for poverty alleviation as well, so they can look forward to that. But I think in all of this, most critical is that the poor stands a chance of being able to work collectively and together and not being divided in an effort to get themselves out of poverty. I think that is the greatest opportunity that the articulation of the government offers to the poor.
Okay. Does anybody have similar differing views?
Phil?
Well, I am a Guyanese living abroad in the U.S. and I've made several trips back and forth here over the years, and I've been very close in terms of following the dynamics of the election, and decided to make a trip back at this time to see, especially with the independence celebration coming up. Wanted to be here, and compared to the other times that I've been here, what I'm seeing just driving around the city and just seeing folks' expression, it seems there's some relief. It seems people exude a certain relief. what I saw also was seemed like voluntary expressions of desire to clean the place. You know, I see a lot of. I was just on Water Street earlier today and saw folks cleaning and whitewashing the median of the street, and it just seems to me that people have a great level of expectation, positive expectation, from what the new government will provide, and that is good because you need folk moving in the right direction, in that direction that is in the way of expecting more and hoping and certainly putting in some effort to they recognize there's a need for effort in order to get things done. I think that those are positive things that I see.
Yeah, I want to echo what's been said by both Vincent and Phil. I think this election really represented one of those moments, those great moments in our history. You go back to emancipation, you know, the end of indentureship, independence, moments when people feel a sense of hope that things will really change for the better. And I think this election represents that. Perhaps it represents that more for those who voted for the coalition, but I would think that for the poor and ordinary people who also voted for the PPP, also would feel that sense of hope for a new beginning. It's unfortunate that countries with our history have to always think about new beginnings, right? Because the struggle for freedom is really an ongoing struggle. You're talking about really overcoming centuries of degradation, centuries of marginalization and oppression. And so every time the country gets a chance to breathe new life into its being, I think the working people, the poor people, the working poor really feel a sense of relief, all right? Because one of the constants in our history is the whole notion of poverty, the whole notion of economic liberation, that even when we express ourselves in political terms, in cultural terms, ultimately the struggle is about bread and butter, and how is it that people can lift their standard of living materially and otherwise? How is it they can feed their children and clothe their children, educate their children, and creating a better life for their children, a life that they did not have generations of that to go through it. And I can hear and see Guyanese people, really those of us who are older, saying, well, we hope that this is a moment for our children and our grandchildren, that they can experience a better life. They can experience they do not have to experience what we've experienced in the last 23 years, which really could have really pulled the country apart. We've always had government overreach. That's, I think, is a fact of life. But I think what the last 23 years represent is really taking that is which we consider to be unfortunate, taking it to a whole new level. The whole convergence of criminality and corruption and favoritism and ethnic marginalization and class domination and party domination, bringing all of those together and taking it in the highest councils of government, really was quite obscene. And so people have a moment to move from that. You tend to see something that must be revolutionary.
Okay. Mr. Williams, you said just now that you're based overseas. Can you tell us what are the people in the diaspora saying about the victory?
Well, there's elation all over. The folks that I've spoken with, certainly in the U.S. and in my network of friends and family, there's an elation and expectation. I know several Guyanese in the U.S. who have been interested in perhaps returning to Guyana at some point along the way. They've reached a certain age, I don't know, maybe my age or whatever, but that they say, well, maybe we should take another go at it back to Guyana. And they've made some trips in the past and they were not really satisfied with what they saw. But I think this new change has in it tremendous hope for folk, and I think I've heard some of that already, that there is expectation that some will be making some trips, even if just to visit initially, but certainly with the expectation that should progress be seen moving forward in a positive direction, I think there should be some very good signs of the fruition of some of that expectation. People will be coming back.
Okay. Mr. Alexander touched on this a bit, but I want to hear from you as well. What does this mean for African Guyanese in particular?
Oh yeah, I mean, Vincent, I think, put it quite well. This is an electric moment for African Guyanese. I alluded to our history and going back to slavery and colonialism and so forth. And African people, black people, wherever they are in the world, they take with them the scars of bondage. They're constantly reminded of that every time they have to deal with governments which take advantage of them. You know, it really raises and brings those scars come out in a real vivid way. And so one of my colleagues, Dion Abrams, in a program that we did last week, really said the feeling among the people he has spoken to, among black people, he says they feel as though apartheid has come to an end. That feeling, and I think it's not an unfounded observation, because African Guyanese, partly they suffered in silence. They become frustrated, become alienated from the nation. They almost felt as though they really had no place. Fear had crept in to the community. I mean, some people did not even want to associate with organizations like ours because for fear. They didn't want to say, I'm African Guyanese and so forth. So Vincent is right when he said it's a kind of liberation, right? And so I think that this would help to reinstill some confidence in African Guyanese, as African Guyanese, but also confidence as Guyanese that, my God, we can lay claim to this place again, that we can feel our place in this Guyana is not just to go to parties and wind up and have fun and entertain people and so on, that we can be part of governance of this country. I think that is extremely important. I mean, an entire generation of African Guyanese have really grown up not knowing what it looks like or feels like for an African to be the head of government and head of state. And some of us take it for granted, you know, but your generation has never experienced that, and so you don't know what it feels like. And so this moment is filled with all kinds of symbolism and really practical experience of catching up. Because in a sense, you felt as though the last 23 years was your lives as a collective had come to a standstill. And now that you can breathe again. So I think this is a tremendous moment for African Guyanese. It's a moment of liberation, as Vincent says. And you could excuse some elements of triumphalism, which I think organizations like ours will really have to work on, right? Because it's natural for people who have been, you know, hounded for so long, right, to feel that sense that, you know, it's our time and so forth, and we have to be very careful about that. I myself, shortly after the election, said that, look, I mean, you know, all of our ethnic groups played an important role, but I wanted to observe the particular role played by African Guyanese. And part of what I was trying to do there, of course I ran into all kinds of criticism that I thought was a black victory and so on. But the point I wanted to make, that here were people who over the last 3 decades were told that you're hooligans, you're violent. People were shot down, 400 and more young men summarily shot down. You're told that you can only go to the stadium, that's your place, and so on. And all of a sudden, you did something to help to create history, right? And I feel that when people do superlative things, you have to lift them up. All right? And that's part of what I was trying to say. Look, I want to lift black people up because they've been down for so long. And here they are doing something that was almost miraculous in our terms. I'm leading the way, not them only by themselves, but playing a leading role. And so that you need to lift them up. Of course, in our ethnic environment, lifting up one set of people is often interpreted as putting down another set of people. And we have to deal with that. But that was not my intention. My intention was to say, we all contributed to this moment, including those who have not voted for the coalition, because you do not see Indians walking around the streets behaving badly. I'm sure there will be sentiments among Indians, you know, we voted for a party that lost and so on. But you don't see them walking around the street vexing and carrying on bad and so on. I think that's a victory for all of us. But you also do not see black people walking around and doing the same thing. I'm sure in their little pockets people would be expressing things and so on. So I really think that this is a moment for self-congratulation, and also as part of, as African Guyanese community, a moment to say we're here, you know, we are ready to take our equal place in helping to make Guyana the success that it could become.
Okay. Mr. Alexander, that momentum that got Guyanese out of their homes, African Guyanese in particular, out of their homes to the polling stations to vote for the coalition, do you think that they can keep up that momentum now that the coalition is the government?
Well, I think they can. It requires two things. It requires, on one hand, leadership from the government in terms of providing the atmosphere and the environment in which they can continue to have that feeling of hope, in which they can continue to believe they can realize their aspirations. But it also requires, at the community level, that there is that understanding that the environment is being created. It's for them also to take control of their own lives at the community level. And I'm inspired by what has happened immediately after. I don't know that community development workers have gone to communities to tell people to clean up. I know the message has been sent out. And I have seen something which must have been latent, suddenly rekindled. In Georgetown, in communities where no state official has turned up, people of their own volition have started the process, so that there is a spirit which they've built upon and can certainly take us in the direction that is desirable, a direction which largely has to be based on doing things from the community up rather than from the top down. What the top has to do is to create the environment. So far, what they have done has helped in creating that atmosphere, and I think they ought to continue along that road. And I think the people are going to be rather responsive once that happens, and we need over time to put institutions in place to facilitate the people's movement, to call it such, because in any paradigm of development which talks about community up, one of the things the state is required to do is provide the institutional framework to assist the people in their own efforts to develop their community, and therefore that is an area in which I think the state will have to be responsive to the reality of Guyana. And I think that is critical in the case of Guyana, because in the case of Guyana, given the way in which we have enclaves, afro-Guyanese enclaves, Indo-Guyanese enclaves, Amerindian enclaves, community development allows people to take life into their own hands and not to attribute failure to any other group, and it allows for institutional arrangements to be directed towards those communities as they seek to take their own lives into their own hands.
Okay. Mr. Williams, I'm sure you have expectations of this new government. I mean, the main fact that you came back to Guyana to sort of see what's going on. Do you think that the government can meet the expectations of its supporters, and not only that, the expectations of the country in general?
I think it's possible. Yes, it's quite possible. The thing that impressed me particularly was the fact that there's a coalition, and I saw that as a very positive sign all around, because as has been hinted here, Guyana is nation of several peoples, and so I think to the extent that it's government is representative of as many of those peoples as possible, it's good for the community, it's good for the country. So I think that what has been laid is a good foundation for the progress and moving in the right direction. There's a lot of goodwill that's been expressed, and I think given the fact that what has been happened so far in the appointments, seemingly there are folk who are qualified in various areas that are there. I mean, I could remember back to my growing up in Guyana and hearing the word technocrats, used to, to identify sort of the ministers who were being appointed at various times in the past. And it seemed to me that there's a bunch of technocrats being appointed now, and that bodes well, because you need folk who know what's happening and what to do, and they know their discipline in order to really execute any kind of plan, any development plan. And I think that's certainly what's been happening so far. It's great in that direction.
Okay, Dr. Hinds.
Elsie, allow me
go
to
ahead.
spin on what
Sure.
Phil has said about technocrats. Traditionally, when we use the term technocrat, we are referring to people who are specialists with some expertise, who are not necessarily a part of the political fray. And so you bring them into LEN.
Right.
And I think our laws provide for each government to have at least, at most, 5 such persons. They're not in the list, they're not in the political fray, but because of the skills they can bring, they're allowed to come in as ministers into the parliament and to lend their skills. That Phil is saying that he's seen a movement of technocrats suggests in this instance that the list is rich. And there is no need to import into the list people with expertise and specialist views, because the list itself already has such people. And I must say that in some regards that is in a sense a rebirth of Guyana where it was eons ago. That in some regards the re-emergence of that set of people whom are often referred to as the middle class, who can legitimately take up the leadership positions and not have to reach out to non-partisan and apolitical people to come and lend their assistance.
Okay. Do you want to weigh in on this?
Yes, Elsie, your original question about expectations.
Yes.
I do think that, yes, expectations, I think the government can meet the expectations of its supporters in the country in general. I think there are 2 things that are important here. The first thing is, I think the government has to show vision. Now, I say that conscious of the fact that in the English-speaking Caribbean, over the last 20 to 30 years, we have not had governments with vision. If you go back to the immediate post-independence era, certainly those governments came into office with a vision. And by vision, what I mean, quite apart from the nuts and bolts of governing, it's a grand idea of where you want to take the country and how people are part of that idea. I mean, if you go back to, the Burnham, the early Burnham era, and Jagan and so on were part of that, and Guyana and so on and things. What you had was a vision of, one people, one nation, one destiny, weren't mere words. They represent a vision of where you want to take this society, feet close and house yourself and all those things and so forth. And what has happened as we move into the era of structural adjustment and globalization, that governments have surrendered the direction of their country to these vague, these market kind of things and so forth. And I think in the process we've lost the soul, appealing to the soul of our country. And I do think that if this new government is able to appeal to the soul of the country and to really give the country a vision as a post-plantation society in a world that David Rudder said that needs islands no more, all right? How do you figure that out? How do you, as a society with so much energy, so much talent, so much natural resources, but in a in a globalized world, right, that is constantly putting obstacles on you? How do you maneuver that and so on? And it is that kind of vision I think that the government has to really put. How do people become part of it? I remember as a kid, 14 years old, Walter Rodney coming to my village and speaking to us as young people. He said, you know, we often talk about history as leaders, but you know, one day somebody will record that we were sitting in this school hall and we were talking about freeing Guyana and Guyana doing better. And you know, I said, my God, so I can be part of history, right? And it really stirred my imagination and probably made me into a political activist for the rest of my life, right? And I think I'm talking about a vision that includes people, that make them feel important, that lift them up so that they can go out without guidance from the state and clean up and do the most things. We kind of experienced that. Phil and Vincent will remember in the first decade and a half of independence, we had that kind of movement and spirit among our people, because there was a connection between the vision of the leadership and where the people saw themselves going. Which brings me to the second point, which is that in order for the expectations to be met, people will have to be patient. All right, I mean, this is very important. And I have to say, again, going back to history, I think our people in the first decade and a half or so of independence were extremely patient. They understood, I think they understood the difficulties of governance. Perhaps that is not, we don't have that at the same level or the same intensity today, but I think if the patience that was showed by the people after the elections that week, when we were going back and forth and anything could happen, if the patience demonstrated by our people during that period is anything to go by, I think that we are in good stead. But if people are patient and understand that governments do not create miracles, maybe people create political miracles like they did on May 11th, but having created a political miracle, the government, you know, then has to really put flesh on that. And so that we will have to be patient. We will have to be forceful within reason. We'll have to hold the government accountable within reason, but we'll have to be patient. I think the Guyanese people are going to be patient. I can hear them say, after 23 years of constant beating, we can be patient for a little while. So if they're patient and the government puts forward a vision that includes them, that is accountability, explaining things to them, I would really like to see my president really speak to the nation on his cabinet. You know, what is the thinking that went into it? There are all kinds of misgivings, the size of the cabinet, etc., etc. And I think that if the leader respects the people, as I do think he does, explains to the country, here is where we are, whole strain, you will know you may have some misgivings, I think it will create that kind of atmosphere where the people begin to trust their government again. And if you trust your government, you tend to be more patient and allows the government to go through the twists and turns that governments must go through as they seek to pull the country forward.
Mr. Alexander, in addition to being patient, as Dr. Hinds suggests, what else should people and African Guyanese in particular be doing now that the government has changed?
There's another element to extend what David was saying that I'd like to add.
Sure.
There was a time at the university when we trained communication practitioners and emphasized what we call development support communication. I think that the concept becomes important again, that whatever we do, we need to have the kind of communication that creates a connection between the people and what's happening, that creates an understanding of what's happening, and that motivates an involvement in what is happening. So the question of communication is very, very critical, and I think is one that needs to be embraced almost immediately, starting, as David said, with an explanation of the cabinet. What's it all about? What's social cohesion about? We haven't had a minister like that before. Why we changed from human services to social protection? You know, why we changed from local government to communities? We need to get that message out there, let people understand that this is an accommodation of their involvement, that these things in themselves are intended to accommodate their involvement. And as we get involved in the various programs and projects, that we have this constant interaction between the policymakers and the people in a communication that tells the people exactly what to expect, what is happening, and what is expected of them.
Okay. And the question now, what should African Guyanese be doing now that the government has changed?
Well, I would like to start it this way. I think one of the big problems we've had in this country is sometimes the absence of mutual respect for the various ethnic groups. And I think that our education system should almost with immediacy address the question of how do we try to instill mutual respect. You know, we have all sorts of funny subjects, social studies and all sorts of things, and we do not have Guyanese history in its true sense as a part of what we're taught. And I think we ought to teach Guyanese history starting from the primary level in a manner that allows for respect of the role of the different groups in our society, and that can go a far way in creating the kind of mutual respect and tolerance which is required if we're going to work together. In that regard, African Guyanese among themselves also need to spend some time looking back to their own history to gain some inspiration from that history, to gain some understanding of themselves from that history, an understanding that can make them recognize what is it we have done in the past, and therefore the capacity that's in us to continue to contribute to our own development and to national development. I think we need to look out for our community. My own view is that in a society like ours, with the enclaves we have, without ill to anyone else, communities can be doing things for themselves. And we have a whole range of villages that are populated essentially by African Guyanese, and they should really go back to the village movement in the sense that creating that ethos of village with leaders, with looking out for each other, with doing things collectively. And in that regard, I think the cooperative movement is still a critical organ, because wherever you have poor people and wherever you are seeking to be involved in entrepreneurship, poor people are not always singularly able to get involved in entrepreneurship, and it's proven across the globe that the cooperative movement is one way, if properly approached, that can give poor people an opportunity to invest their skills, to invest whatever little financial resources they may have, and to invest their time in the pursuit of objectives that are worthy, objectives that are well created, objectives that are self-development, development-oriented. I think that is where the focus should in fact be.
Mr. Williams, what should African Guyanese in the diaspora be doing? Catching a plane, coming back to Guyana, investing in Guyana? What?
Yes, all of that. I mean, I think it, as I hinted earlier, it requires another visit, so to speak. And I think it's going to have that impact. They're going to come back as time passes, you know, to lay their foundation, to lay their roots, to have a place that they can come to quite often. I have a few friends who seem to be living here, you know. Every time I call, you know, I was in Guyana for a few weeks or something, you know. So I think that's going to be happening more and more. The diaspora, I think, is going to be a lot more connected to what's been happening, because in the past, talking with folk, they, you know, it's like a distant drum for them. They weren't as connected because, you know, they had a sense that things were not going well. They knew things were not going well, and so after a certain point, you sort of just cut, you know, you turn your mind off of stuff in order to avoid unpleasant things that might be coming along the way. But I think now there's a new connection going to be established, and we're going to be hearing a lot more from the diaspora in that positive way. One of the things I heard the president mention along the way is that he's going to have a department of the diaspora, which is quite a novel idea that I think would be very, very important, because there's, as we all know, there's folk who went abroad, studied, and laid foundation there, and have developed certain skills and resources that clearly are very valuable and useful in Guyana. And I think to the extent that the government could move in that direction as fast as they could, I think it's going to be a positive result, because I think a lot of folk that are interested in making a contribution, either by coming or providing resources or skills or talents, so that they can see a better Guyana. I mean, I remember again from growing up here, and when I went abroad, and I had an opportunity later to travel to various other Caribbean countries, I saw Guyana as was way ahead in terms of development of many of those countries that you used to hear good things about. I mean, nothing was wrong with them necessarily, but Guyana was way ahead in terms of infrastructure, education, and just the thinking of folk. Education was a great thing, and so I think that is a direction that we all want to revive and keep moving forward and on. So I think that's the kind of thing that we want to begin to reinstitute and certainly move forward.
Okay.
Move forward in that
Dr. Hinds,
direction.
I want you to comment on something different. Some have referred to the victory of the coalition as one that is multiracial. Can you comment on that?
Well, in a large sense, it is a multiracial victory. It has to be a multiracial victory in the sense that all ethnic groups, if you look at the numbers, we see Amerindians playing a role. We see a small percentage of the Indian Guyanese population playing a role. We see Africans playing a role. And so in that sense, it has to be a multiracial victory. But if we are talking about a multiracial victory, I am very firm in my mind that multiracial must not be a mask for covering over the individual contributions of our ethnic groups. I think there is an alarmist view in Guyana that, and I hinted at this earlier, that if you talk about a particular ethnic group, then somewhere that you're disrupting or you're disloyal to Guyana, you're creating division and so on. And I think in our heightened sense of anxiety that we're often in, we kind of take that to be some kind of truth. And I think that while it's noble in a sense to aspire, and that's what we can do, we can aspire to be, one single Guyanese nation, and we are every day doing that. Then I think that we have to recognize that even when we have problems, given our history, those problems, they manifest themselves differently in the different ethnic groups. So, I mean, there is poverty, but there is a way in which black poverty manifests itself different from Indian poverty and so on. All right? I mean, the poor man in Alboy's tongue, right, who doesn't have a job, really doesn't have recourse to land and all those things, like the rural person, all right, who may be poor but could go plant a garden because there's land there and so on and so forth. And so, where people live really sometimes influence the way in which they experience the same thing, right? So I think it's a multiracial victory. But above and beyond that is a victory for those who have been most oppressed. And those who have been most oppressed have been poor people of all races. And in the midst of that, African Guyanese have been probably victims 3 times, 4 times, because they form the bulk of the support of the out group. Right? So if the PPP represented the in group, the African Guyanese were really, so no, the PPP would want to punish, as it did, to punish the PNC. Well, the way you punish the PNC is to punish its supporters, all right? And so I don't think really people sit down. No, some people are going to say, David, no, that's not true. But I don't think people really sit down and say, I want to punish black people. Right? I know some people are going to say, no, those people really sit down and say they don't want to do that. But I don't think, I think first of all, it's about how do we preserve power for ourselves. And in the process of preserving power for yourself, you figure out the best way is to keep the other group out. So if I keep them out, they're not going to be able to dominate me. And so in the long run, you end up dominating them. Right? And so I think that African Guyanese have been affected in particular ways. And so therefore, they may have a different kind of stake in this multiracial victory than East Indians and to some extent Amerindians. So yes, it was a multiracial victory, but I think there were particular victory. It's a victory for that small percent of Indian Guyanese, 5% or 10%, I don't know, right? Who decided that I'm not voting PPP, all right? And so it's a particular victory for them, but they're coming from the standpoint of rocking the boat that was in power, all right? And for Amerindians and African Guyanese, all right, it was also a multiracial victory for them, but it's a multiracial victory that comes from the feeling of being oppressed, the feeling of being locked out, all right? And now that I've broken down the doors and I'm peeping in, all right? So we all come to the multiracial victory from our different and our various positions. So yes, all hail to the multiracial victory, but all hail to the groups, each group in their little way, contributing in their own particular way to that multiracial victory.
Okay, the question now then becomes, is it possible to have a government of national unity that adequately addresses the needs of each ethnic group when the government is largely supported by one particular ethnicity?
I see Mr. Alexander is gearing to go for that one. So I will hold my peace.
Actually, I wanted to piggyback a bit on what Phil said and what David said, and to come to your question. Quickly on what Phil said. I think there are three ways in which the overseas Guyanese could be involved, those in the diaspora. Many of them send remittances to Guyana. I think they have to readdress their mind to the role of remittances. They have to stop remittances being a source of mendicancy. And remittances will now become a source of project development. So they must deal with the local Guyanese in terms of remittances about specific goals and objectives. Could be education, could be projects, could be community development, and not have them here unemployed, mendicants just collecting the packets from overseas. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think that, and Phil referred to this, those who are migrants can come back, they can bring their skills, they can bring their capital, and in that way they can also make a contribution to Guyana. And thirdly, there are those who may not come back, but who are skilled, who may come from time to time to lend their skills. And in those three broad ways, I think they could make a contribution. The multi-ethnic victory, I think it's a multi-ethnic, multiracial, call it what you may, victory, because not only from the standpoint of how they have contributed, but from the standpoint of what they can derive. You know, when you're a victor, you tend to get a trophy. And I think the trophy that's available is that all of these various ethnic groups in their enclaves will now be provided with an environment where they can pursue uninhibited their community development and their personal development. And in that regard, it's a victory. It's also a victory insofar as the things that are beyond community, the things that are national and requires inclusivity in terms of not only policy but operationalizing, that this government can provide the framework for that, so that you could see development at different levels. You could see development at the personal level, at the community level, and at the societal level, and you could see the opportunity being created for the various ethnic groups, wherever they are, to pursue their development without interfering with national things at their various levels. But at the same time, you can see the government providing an opportunity for the collective determine the framework for taking the country forward and the policies for taking the country forward, as well as the areas of operation which are truly national. I mean, when you talk monetary matters and fiscal matters and foreign affairs and so forth, those are things that are not community things, they are national things. And I think the fact that the coalition represents, if you look at it, all of the ethnic groups in good percentage, then you have a possibility for all of them to bring to the table their views on these matters and to try to create a truly national view with regard to those matters. And I think in that regard, though I'm feeding off of David, it answers the question that you've posed to me. There is this issue of what you may call power sharing, which I think should be seen from two perspectives. Should be seen from a lateral perspective, where power is devolved down to communities, and therefore laterally they can share power parallelly in the various communities, and then vertical power sharing, where in the hierarchy of things there is a mechanism for the collective at large to influence and to be part of what's happening at the top.
Elsie, I think the outcome here is very important. We've talked about power sharing, government of national unity in abstract terms for a very long time, and I think this is the closest we've come to really confront the possibility in real terms. I think what the lesson that we are seeing is that the two ethnic groups or the three ethnic groups or 4 or 5 ethnic groups don't necessarily have to vote together in one place to create a government of national unity. I think that if you have the kind of upsurge that we have had in this election, yes, the coalition, the supporters of the coalition, I would say, 80–90% of them, well, not 90%, but certainly a large percent of them have been African Guyanese. But I think it is what African Guyanese, what was the platform that was put before them? Were you voting for African domination, or were you voting for a government of national unity? And I think for two elections, in 2011 the APNU put that before the electorate, and now the coalition put it before the electorate. So I think I think one can safely deduce that those who voted for the coalition really voted for a broader national government, because it was part of what was put to them and part of what would have motivated them. And so I think that it is possible to use this opening to move towards a government of national unity. That, you have a government that is voted largely by one ethnic group, but with other ethnic groups pitching in and so on. But you have that government, but it's a government that has a vision that is larger than its own constituency, and talking about the larger constituency. And we can only broaden, first of all, broaden the coalition, right, to include more and more people, but also setting the stage. Because if this government succeeds in toning down the anxiety that we have about government and what it can do and how it can marginalize you, if this government succeeds in reducing the perception of the government as a monster to being a government that cares, I think it then opens up the possibility for us to begin to talk about sharing government by the various parties. At some point, I think we have to confront the uncomfortable fact that the PPP would have to be part of governance. Now, they did not act in that way when they were in government. It doesn't mean that we must act the same way. My own view is that we should use the first period here as putting some distance between the old discredited PPP regime and a new dispensation in which the PPP comes around to understanding its national role. Because I think that's what right now the PPP is not in the national mode. It's about we the PPP have been cheated, we've not been defeated. So they're still in that mode, right? And I think we have to give them some chance to let off the steam. And I think once the steam is let off, a formal a movement must be made, constitutional and otherwise, to improve the PPP in governance of the country. Ultimately, no single party or no single group of party has the monopoly on what it takes to move this country forward. Because all it takes from the PPP is to say to those 201,000 people who voted for them, that look, engage in civil disobedience, engage in disruption, and they could be effective, all right? And which would mean that this government would not be able to govern as smoothly as they ought to. And so therefore one has to begin to cast your mind forward and to think about how we can pull everyone along. And often we know it's difficult to pull people without the party of their preference. And so yes, I would think that we have a great opening, probably the biggest opening that we've had in our history. 1953 was a coalition that was put together, the original PPP. It didn't last beyond a couple of years, and I think now we have what people can see when they look at the coalition, the makings, what a government of Guyana could look like. 6 parties working together, not all ideologically on the same wavelength, but all are committed to Guyana. And if this coalition governs, it will prove to the people that our leaders can work together in the interests of our country. And if they do that, then we may achieve what all of us have said could be one of the most important solutions to our ethnic problem, and that is creating a representative national government.
Okay. Now we move on to a controversial question. Many people bemoan the fact that African Guyanese are disproportionately represented in the business sector. What is the cause for this, and how do you think that this can be repaired?
Phil, you're the businessman.
Business requires a certain amount of skills, discipline, and commitment. And, you know, in order to last, you need resources, financial resources. And those are things that, you know, that certainly has been absent from the broad group of African Guyanese in terms of history. There have been some who's, you know, we've always had African Guyanese who've done well, 1 or 2 here and there, but it requires discipline, particularly in the accumulation, because, you know, many have started businesses, and when they begin to see some success, they begin to use the fruits of the labor too early. You know, one of the things is we need to adopt an attitude where we need to sacrifice for the greater good, for, you know, for long term, and begin plowing back into the business some of that profits that we're making early, so that we can delay, you know, any kind of gratification that we may have. Because one of the things you want to do in business is to prevail. And too often, you know, you see that happen. It's not only a situation here in Guyana, but I'm an accountant, I'm a CPA in the U.S., and have a number of clients, African clients and white clients too. But in the African community, there is always a desire to begin using this, you know, the spoils too early. And I think it's important to harness and be able to, you know, keep sufficient resources in the business, so that when hard times come, which they usually come to all businesses, you should be able to prevail and keep going. So I think in terms of, from the business point of view, I think the important thing is to go into business, but realize that it's going to take some time and sacrifice before you begin to see the rewards. And I think if we can see that, and if we can do that, I think there should be a lot more Guyanese wanting to do that type of thing.
Okay, Mr. Alexander.
This is a very critical question on the Guyana landscape. I don't think that anybody can question the ability of African Guyanese to come up with business ideas. I think history has shown that we can, and that a lot of the businesses which have eventually thrived in this country were built on the original idea of African Guyanese. So I think we need to clear the table on any belief that African Guyanese do not have business ideas. They have historically always had, have been the originators of much of the business, but have not been able to always carry on. And there are a range of reasons why they have not always been able to carry on. I think Phil has touched on one, which is critical, the question of early gratification. I think in some regards it's a historical dysfunctionality that leads us down that road. We have found some ways of liberation which are not necessarily sustainable. And I think coming out of our history, some of the ways of some of the acts of gratification for us are means of liberation, but they're not sustainable, and therefore we have to find a way to curtail that kind of gratification and to find ways to be more sustainable, both in terms of the business itself and in terms of kind of empire building, where you're building to pass on an inheritance to your children and to your children's children. I think that's a regard in which there's need for work to be done. But having said that, I may controversially say that history in some ways have fashioned who we are, and for whatever reason African Guyanese are largely into professions and things like that. And I think what has happened in Guyana, particularly under the immediate past regime, is that they've attempted to play down the role of professions, whether it's medical, whether it's teaching, whatever profession it is, because and historically have attempted to attribute wealth to the work of what they call the working class, and to see professionals as what they call petty bourgeoisie and parasites on the backs of the working class. And I think that has to change, and we have to see professionals for who they are. In fact, we live in a world today where much wealth is created that is not necessarily created in the factory. There's a different paradigm of wealth creation that has taken place, and so we need to pay due regard to the role of the health worker, the teacher, and people of that sort, and to give them their due reward. And so you may not find a situation of equalization in terms of how many Africans go into business, but you may find a situation of equalization in terms of people being rewarded for their true contribution to the creation of wealth, to the development of the country. And I think in that environment, not prejudicing the need for more African Guyanese to be involved in business, that African Guyanese can be better rewarded and better positioned, given even at this time the contribution they make in sectors other than the business sector.
Okay, we are almost out of time. So Dr. Hinds, you can answer the last question. How does Cuffy 250 see its work going forward? Will there be any change in direction?
No, certainly not. We probably become more aggressive in terms of going about. As you know, Elsie, our work is about going into our communities and trying to get our communities to begin to work together as communities again, to begin to look at critical areas in which the community can intervene, areas of help with education, areas of consciousness, and so forth. And so we want to continue that kind of work. We want to really instill the spirit of self-activity and self-reliance, which I think is so crucial. Vincent and Phil referred to it before. I mean, a really wonderful example of what we're talking about is the folks on the West Bank. We've done a lot of work, Cuffy 250, on the West Bank of Demerara, Stanleytown, Bagsville, Good Intent Sisters. And tomorrow night, they, on their own initiative, without direction from anybody, have decided that they're going to have their own flag-raising ceremony in Stanleytown tomorrow night. They're going to have the big thing in town the next day, and they're doing it tomorrow night. And they just decided to do it on their own. And this is a community that Cuffy 250 has been really involved in, and the spirit of self-activity is really so strong there. And we are encouraged by that. It is that spirit that we are going to continue to take into the communities, and hopefully we will now have a government that will not see consciousness raising and self-activity, encouragement of self-activity and self-reliance as being subversive, so that we feel that our better days for our work are in front of us.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Alexander, Mr. Williams, and Dr. Hinds for being on African Drums. Thank you, viewers, for staying with us. This has been African Drums, a television organ of the Cuffy 250 Committee, an organization dedicated to the empowerment of the African Guyanese community through education and the encouragement of self-activity. Please like our Facebook page, it's Cuffy 250, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, also Cuffy 250. Please also send us an email and donate to the cause. It's cuffy250gy@gmail.com. I'm Elsie Harry. See you next time.
And if you're on the West Bank, please turn out to the flag raising ceremony tomorrow night.